Welcome to Fantasy Femme Fatales, where two fantasy readers dive headfirst into the worlds of romantasy and dark romance. From fantasy deep dives to book club banter, we're talking plot, magic systems, and all the spicy details. So pour a drink, grab your latest obsession, and let's turn the page together.
Part 2, Anathema. Oh my God, we're so ready for this. Oh my God. Okay. Today, we are going to cover the first half of Part 2, Anathema. So up to and including chapter 40. If you're like us, you could not stop. Part 2 is just like delivering everything that we've been waiting for. The foundation has been laid and our characters are about to come together. And so we are very excited. We have so many things to talk about. So we left off at the end of part 1 with Maveth being dragged away to Mr. Morose's and realizing how much of a sadistic creep this guy is. And Maveth is kind of like mentally preparing herself for Alicia to be sent to banishing. You know, you get what you get. And Zevander met our beautiful little dark rose, Maveth, who we think may be the last of the Corvakai people, aka a descendant of the goddess of death, who may have also just like come into her powers, and maybe the missing piece of Zevander's curse, because he was unable to kill her. He vanished back to Aethyria before he went on his little rescue mission to capture and hide Dolian. So what a setup for part 2. A couple trigger warnings. There is some off-page mentions of sexual violence and things that we are going to cover today. Things get a little spicy as well, but if you're like us, you are here for it.
Yay.
How are you feeling, Kara?
I've just been waiting for this episode. I am going to unleash the beast today. So many theories and things that when we were doing our last episodes, I wanted to touch on. So I think it is important to share with our listeners that we learned our lesson. We are only going to read as best as we can up to the part that we're covering so that we can kind of hold ourselves back from spoilers and sort of accurately come up with different theories and stuff like that. But as Sarah mentioned, this one was just too action-packed we'd be here all night going through part 2 if we did it all in one. So I'm excited for this first half of part 2, and I think it'll tie in really nicely when we cover next week's episode as well.
I can't wait. Okay, so today's episode, full transparency, is probably going to be a little bit longer. We're keeping it as tight as humanly possible without withholding any of the juicy details. And there are so many. So we want to jump in. Now, I just have to say, Keri Lake is just serving my nerdy gothic soul everything that it's ever dreamed of. And I could not begin this episode without a bit of a revisit of some of the words and meanings that she has offered us through this story. And I am just growing more and more to be aware of how intentional she's being with her words. And it is just making me thirsty for more. There's a term in literature. It's called onomastic symbolism, which is when words are used that have origins that are outside of the story and then woven in. And Keri Lake is using a whole slew of them. So they have meanings outside of the story, but when they're included, they provide like depth and a vibe. And so we touched on a few of these words and the meanings behind them. I wanted to go over a few of them. I also like fully missed one that I feel like should have slapped me right in the face. And so I have to talk. So we have Mr. Morose, we have Cadavros. These are probably our two most obvious instances of this onomastic symbolism. The words reflect ideas of death, morbidity, but we're getting these characters. They have an evil nature. Anathema, the title of our book, is something that is cursed or condemned by God. There's a reference in the Old Testament and its usage about a creature or an object set apart for sacrificial offering, which at this stage of the book, can I just say, I'm a little bit scared for Maven and the title being Anathema, if she is in fact our sacrificial offering.
Please no. Let's just hope and pray that either the Crone Witch swoops in to save her or she starts to manifest some powers.
We have Eidolon's Keep, which we talked about in the last episode, the meaning of it being a phantom or an image without real existence. And As we spend more time in Eidolon's keep, we come to learn that there are spirits that live in the keep, and it's also possible that Zevander is a phantom. He doesn't have an existence, so to speak. We talked about freedom last episode and how he's kind of trapped and exudes this darkness. He wields shadows. And so I think calling him a phantom, at least in Aethyria, would be valid. He kind of just keeps to himself and stays in the shadows. So I love this intentional vibe that we're getting from Keri Lake. There's really no detail that she is willing to look past, and I love it. So a few more. We have the red god, Seides, in Greek mythology. That is the god of death. We are introduced to Deimos in the story of Deimos and Mortasia. Deimos is also a Greek god. He is the god of fear and terror, and often accompanied their father into battle in stories in Greek mythology, which there's a really clear parallel to the character that we meet today and the story. So we will come back to this, but I just love how she's tying this all together. Now, the one that I fully missed is Foxglove, aka Foxglove Parish. And when the idea sparked for me that Foxglove probably had a meaning to it, I found so many things, and they all seem to kind of come together connected to Anathema, and it gave me so much joy. So here are a few that I found interesting. So first off, Foxglove is a plant, and it is associated with themes like magic, mystery, and even danger. And it symbolizes insincerity, yet embodies resilience, balance, and harmony. It's known to hurt and to heal, and is used in medications. It also symbolizes the duality of life, the good and the bad, and has strong ties to the unseen world beyond the veneer of human perception. Foxglove's alternate name is Witch's Glove, which I love, and Foxglove is able to flourish in various environments and creates beauty where maybe there has been no beauty before. And a lot of this came from an online reference called Hello Fearless. So thank you, Hello Fearless, for all of the wonderful information you put together for us. They describe Foxglove saying, "The Foxglove requests that we stand up tall and announce our presence to the world. The toxicity of Foxglove reminds us that no one is perfect, and despite having flaws and regrets, we should banish shame. It is our imperfections that make us unique and beautiful."
I want to shout out, Sarah, the way I feel like the value that you bring to our audience with bringing some of this lore to the surface, that cannot go understated. I've never seen anyone that gets so passionate about the research that you do, like around these books. And I feel like Keri Lake is such the perfect author to kind of shine a light on some of your skills that way, because I feel like that's exactly what she wants her readers to do. These are things that I wouldn't necessarily think to research or kind of introspect deeper on. So I'm just so excited to bring this to our audience and for them to be able to kind of start to put these puzzle pieces together as we go throughout the book. Definitely not a surprise to see that she's kind of pulling us deeper into a web that kind of keeps us consumed with some of this wordplay. I'm reading Nightshade, the Nightshade duology, and that is pretty much the exact same thing. Keri Lake, really, she's nothing if not a well-researched author. And mark my words, these words will come up again. So pay attention, keep notes, have a glossary, buckle up, you're going to need them.
This shows me she's doing her homework behind the scenes, and she's choosing her words so well. Like we talked about in part 1, how much content there was in, like, what was it? 200 pages, 130 pages. Like, it's remarkable that she can do what she does. And if you are a nerd like me, then you dig into the internet and you realize she's telling you more beyond the page. And it is like so exciting to look something up and know that there is something there, that it wasn't just in your head. So kudos, Keri Lake. We are loving this whole experience. So Foxglove, again, I kind of felt dumb for like missing that, but it was such a smart choice that I think she made. There are clear parallels to Foxglove and the things that we talked about in episode 1, how this environment is full of mystery, danger, and insincerity. Like those words on their own are just very representative of this place and this darkness and this the feeling of unsafety that Maveth and Alicia have. There's a connection to the unseen world. So this presence of death, the god of death, and the Kershurian trench that's connected to the Umbra Veil, this like thing that's like beyond what the eye can see. But there's also this like opportunity for our characters to emerge. So she was left there. And whoever left her probably chose to leave her in Foxglove Parish, I want to say. Like, I don't think it's an accident. And maybe that was because it was close to the trench or this vein of Vivicantum that we've heard about. Maybe there's a recognition of the duality of this place, that there's potential. There's the vein, there's the trench, or there's resilience. There's a need for balance that has not been formed yet. There is an insincerity that is breeding in this place. And so maybe Maveth has been brought there for a reason. I thought the alternate name Witch's Glove was also really interesting. It kind of gives this idea of something being hidden and like beyond the naked eye. And like Maveth is kind of just like thrown into this little town and called a curse. And all the while, she does appear to be a bit of a witch. Maybe that's how it's supposed to be. Could Foxglove Parish be the land that the battle in the story of Mortasia and Deimos takes place on? Could there be the opportunity for this like good and bad to occur in this land and like create something reborn? And my last thought here, Maveth, who is our lost and abandoned character, she gives us this like parallel. There's a duality in this meaning of Foxglove and also her opportunity to thrive and to flourish in various environments, to create beauty where there is none. And maybe it's calling to her, a request to stand tall and announce her presence and relinquish the shame that she's lived with and stand in her uniqueness and her beauty and honor her imperfections. Like, that gave me chills. If we can pick up a theme from this story and it's something along those lines, to find that kind of beauty in a Gothic story is like magic.
I'm obsessed. I am so absolutely obsessed with that. How Foxglove could possibly be the place where Mortasia and Deimos actually had their big, great battle. Especially the idea of rebirth. I feel like that theme has come up a lot, like death, rebirth throughout the book. And this idea of the red god, I'm still not sold on it being a real god. So that is kind of like just making me suspicious of the whole red god thing.
Yeah, we haven't heard about the red god lately. It was really an emphasis in the first part, especially in Foxglove, but we really haven't gotten any references. It's been very focused on these other gods.
Yeah, and if it were any other author, I might think, yeah, maybe that was just setting us up to be a catalyst for this new world Maveth is entering. But I think it's going to come back. I got my money on the red god coming back full swing, and it's somehow tying into these other gods that we know. So we have a lot to get through today, which is why, again, we've split this part into 2 episodes. But as we mentioned, really where we left off was Maveth being dragged into the creepy Mr. Moreau's lair and bracing for Alicia's banishment. And it is now time for said banishment. So at the beginning of part 2, we see Maveth attending Alicia's banishing ceremony, which is held under a rare full moon on the winter solstice. So definitely an ominous sign, could be some symbolism there. Of course, our friend the Crone Witch makes a fleeting appearance, and Sanctum Crane shocks everyone by announcing a second banishment for Uncle Riften. Finally, some justice for one of the men in Foxglove Parish. I felt like it was very much patriarchy at first with this Foxglove order and control over women, but I think Uncle Riften deserves it a little bit.
He deserved it, and I was shocked. Like,
right?
I didn't think that there was room in this town for like some actual justice.
Totally. I was so happy to see some of that justice being delivered to him once and for all. But Maveth, with her little heart of gold, tries to intervene regardless. So she grabs a torch from a nearby villager. And as this happens, she gets some sort of flashback, or a memory strikes her. And so from the book, she remembers the dream that I'd had of Danira, Morose's servant girl. The symbol on her hand that I saw clearly in my head the intersecting lines. A rush of heat and adrenaline charged through me. As he neared, I threw out my hand on instinct, and a loud clattering sent me jumping back on a shocked breath. On the ground lay a pile of ivory-colored bones.
Bones.
The first powers that we've finally seen from Mavis that aren't just dead people coming to see her in the night, really. So super pumped about what that could mean. With no other escape, Mavis and Alicia, who is naked and vulnerable, and her baby daddy Riften flee into the eating woods. During this escape, Mavis loses track of Alicia, but sees some sort of flash of black swish past her, which turns out to be our boy Rayvox. Mavis is being attacked by what are called Wiccans in the Eating Woods. So Rayvox kind of swoops in to help Mavis, but then he leaves her, not to be seen again while she has to run through the Eating Woods on her own. So shortly after, Mavis finds herself face to face with Morose. He grips her by the throat, hits her across the face, and tries to claim her back. But their confrontation is interrupted by a demonic beast, possibly a Rathivore, that kills Morose, consumes him, and takes his form. We're introduced to another creature at this stage, and finally this horrific Mr. Morose is gone. But like, which is worse? We don't know. We don't know yet. I guess that remains to be seen. Uncle Riften shows some of his humanity and sacrifices himself to protect Mavis, but ends up falling victim to the Rathivore. And as Mavis navigates the Eating Woods on her own, she finds this glowing bone archway marking the Unravel, where Alicia is found crouching by the wall. In the book, Mavis's experience passing through the arch is described as an inexplicable urge to pass through pulled at me, beckoning me beyond the archway. Mavis feels out the shimmering wall and it doesn't harm her, but as she goes to move through it, she does see Morose, or what used to be Morose, standing in the bushes ready to pounce at the girls. Mavis runs through the barrier, but when she reaches back to pull Alicia through, she hits a hard surface. The liquid barrier had hardened into a wall, and Alicia could no longer see or hear her. So at this point, Mavis is alone and unfortunately gets captured by these really creepy guards who are suspicious of her ability to speak their language. This is something that comes up a few times in this part of the book, but it's not quite clear yet why she's able to speak their language. So we learn very quickly in this stage that these guards who take her have some pretty disgusting intentions with her. They talk about her scent, her orange smell. So not only can they smell that scent, but also Zevander can. And we're getting an understanding that they don't have the best intentions with Mavis. So she is taken by these guards to a place called Bones Guard, which is a brutal dungeon reserved for the most violent criminals. So that was a wild sequence of events that we've got. So let's dive into this. So much is happening so fast. Sarah, I'd love to hear your thoughts because this is where things really started to heat up and I started to feel like, okay, Zevander has got to come into play here soon.
Yeah, I mean, I would say my first thought after reading this was like, of course, Mavis can't catch a break. You know, she's fought off the townspeople. She's saved her sister, in essence, only to find herself in the woods, chasing off not one monster, but two, because Mr. Morose decided to run into the woods today. Like, can we just talk about how everyone decided to jump full on into the Eating Woods that everyone's apparently been terrified? Today's the day. We're all just going to go on a little walkabout. And then finds herself on the other side of the wood, immediately found by creepy ass guards. So, like, you know, are we surprised? No. Are we disappointed? Yeah. Like, give this girl a break, you know?
I was hoping that she would just run through the Umbervale and somehow leap into Zevander's arms, who she only met once in her life, and they would ride off into the sunset. I know that's not how these things work, but a girl could dream. The biggest thing for me that stood out was Mavis's powers. There was this winter solstice and the full moon around the banishing ceremony. And it just so happens to be the first time that Maveth's powers have truly started to awaken. Could she be part of the Lunaseers somehow, right? That get their energy from the moon. And then there's the winter solstice, which for me feels like a time of death and rest and darkness. And again, brings that theme of like death and rebirth. So if Maveth's powers connect to death, could the solstice act as a kind of portal where the boundaries between life and death somehow blur, making it easier for her abilities to manifest?
I love that. I mean, we do know that like in part 1, I think the bath scene with Zevander, there's a reference to the full moon, or there being like something to the moon cycle and his powers and how it like drives him crazy. Like it was kind of giving like Cal and Mai essence, like where he's going to become an animal and not be able to control himself. There is a comment by Dolian. Dolian suggests that her powers may just have awoken. So it does seem like there's something going on in this very particular part of time or the trauma that is like allowing Maveth to like act differently and show up in her powerful magical ways.
If that is how Zevander was described reacting to a full moon, let's just hope that there's a full moon in our very near future before the end of this book.
There's that reference to like she gets this vision and she sees the Liverian girl and like the markings on her hand. And I think because of that vision, she was able to like envision that glyph. And that's what allowed her to channel that energy into this thing, which we will talk about in this episode, the bone whip. The bone whip glyph that she pulled out in this moment. Obviously, we know there's other magic connected to Aethyria, but this one seems to be unique to Maveth, and I would say absolutely on brand for a descendant of the goddess of death. So this was very, very exciting to see this like very random act of magic at this point in the story.
All I can imagine is when Maveth finally does become big and badass, whipping this massive bone whip around. Like I'm just seeing like a lasso.
There's just so much room, and we have a character that seems to be like boundless. She has yet to really be defined to us, unlike some of the other characters who feel like they fit into a certain box of sorts. So Zevander learns of a mortal we know as Maveth, that she has crossed into Aethyria. And as he hears about this mortal crossing, he recognizes that that is probably the woman that he visited in Mortasia. So her crossing gives him some confirmation that I think he's been resisting, this connection to the 7 bloodlines. And the fact that she crossed over means that she pretty much has to be part of those bloodlines because they are the only ones who can cross through the Umbra Veil in Aethyria. Zevander visits Dolian and he gives him a vial of Maveth's blood. If we remember, he had his little blood friend carving a path for him into the Bronwick house, and he collected that blood. So he gives it to Dolian to analyze to see if he can provide some more confirmation around this bloodline. Dolian also analyzes the stone that he brought back. He had a very tiny little bloodstone. And as he's analyzing it with his witchy ways, it morphs into the death glyph. It's a scythe-like mark intertwined with a bird's eye, tied to Maveth's potential powers. If you can picture the chapter sigils that we've seen, it feels like a very clear connection to that visual. Now, visiting Maveth again, she's been thrown into a dungeon at Bonesguard. She's left to fight off this scrappy criminal in this like dagger fight. They give her a dagger. Idiots. They give her a dagger, think she's not going to use it. She manages to cut the guy, but she has this kind of like weird exchange where she cuts him, and then all of a sudden this huge scorpion appears. Wonder who that could be. And the man is immobilized, and she looks behind her to find that the guards are dead. So terrifying, but also like, thank you, Zevander. Thank you for rescuing her. Maveth wakes up and she's been strapped to a horse and she's with a masked man she doesn't recognize, but she notices that he has these striking orange and gold eyes. Our sexy friend Zevander has come together. I have to read the words that are used to describe Zevander in this moment. A black mask with metallic embellishments covered the lower half of his face, but even with his disguise, I recognized him. I had seen those unusual eyes before, and what had seemed like a dream, the burnt orange and bright gold that surrounded his pupil like an explosion of light, nearly glowing from the depths of his hood. This is a moment where we think about how Keri has used color and the lack thereof in the entire story. And we get a moment like this, and it is the most penetrating, sunset kind of energy that you get in your mind because you've gotten none of it. Everything's been bleak, and then you get this glimpse into this powerful color into your mind.
I feel like she plays with my senses that much that it almost feels like I can taste the color of his eyes in this part.
I love that. Yeah, I get that with the scent of Maveth. How they describe her scent is ooh, it smells delicious.
Yeah.
So Maveth begins her quest to try to convince basically everyone to drop her back at the Bone Arch. We're going to see this over and over again in this episode. She desperately wants to go back to try to find Alicia, and she is denied for the first time. And Zevander is pretty awkward in this scene. He basically won't acknowledge her, won't talk to her. Finally, the two of them introduce themselves, and then he basically gives her the silent treatment for the rest of the trip, and then puts her under a sleeping spell. So he brings her back to Eidolon's keep, and she's still asleep. She's put in a dungeon alongside Dolian, and he kind of investigates this connection to the beast she described when she was talking to Zevander about her encounter in the woods. And Dolian speculates that this beast could be the banished Cadavros. We're on to you with Cadavros, we're pretty sure. And he says, in my visions, I imagined him returning from the very flames said to have consumed him, summoned from death. But what if he hasn't been consumed? What if he was simply denied his powers, stripped of it, and banished to the lands where no Vivicantum exists? What if he's been slumbering there this whole time? So, a bit of foreshadowing here. There's kind of this question, in his state, can he come back to Aethyria? And Dolian says it would take tremendous power to shatter these wards. If that is him, then why would the king have spared him? Why not destroy him? Only the blood of the seven and a vein can allow someone to come back through the Umbra Veil. And where there's a vein, there's plenty of Vivicantum and Sable Fire, and Cadavros knows how to wield it. So we get this kind of bomb of information. We as the readers know it's looking pretty likely that this guy in the woods is probably Cadavros. We also know that when Morose has this exchange with the Wrathivore in the forest, he gives him a little bit of Vivicantum, and then the beast takes it, swallows it, and then Morose is I know where there's more. I know there's a vein. So we also get that terrifying confirmation pretty quickly that there is a vein nearby, and it is in Mortasia. And if this guy is who he may be, then we are all in a lot of trouble here. So Dolian suggests that Cadavros might have been stripped of his powers and slumbering in exile and just waiting for a chance to return. He speculates that Cadavros could break the wards if he could find the blood of the seven and a Vivicantum source. So they seem okay with that theory and kind of move on. And then Dolian pours some liquid Vivicantum on Maveth, who is still asleep, and this ancient death sigil appears on her neck, which is confirmation of her lineage. Dolian then brings out this large book made of bone and feathers and all these strange carvings, and he talks to Zevander about the Corvicae tradition where they pass down powers through a death baptism. A child was bonded to a protective beast, and the blood of the raptor, who was the beast, created a bond between the child and the beast, and then that beast protected the child. This book can only be opened by the Corvicae, and it's expected to have a lot of helpful information about a race that is really not well understood. So in order to open it, they need Maveth. They need her to open this book for them and really see if they can get to the bottom of this group of people who seem to be very powerful. So they realize in this moment, Maveth's powers must be preserved in order for them to survive. And if she were to die, they would lose them forever. And it's seeming to be a turning point in their history where they have a lot to lose, so they can't risk losing a power like Maveth's. There's a possibility that the spiders that are hiding in the dungeon might be able to infect other people with this curse as well. Dolian talks about his vision of a locust plague that did in fact turn Mancers into flesh-eating beasts, which kind of validates Zevander's fears. And this plague that Dolian has envisioned A similar one occurred a long time ago, and in fact, only the Corvi survived. So once again, a lot happening here, a lot that has been shared. Kara, you have been holding yourself in through all of that. Tell me your thoughts.
I mean, I don't even know where to start. Like, there's just so much that happens in every little snippet of this book. I've been thinking a lot about the speculation that Dolian shared behind Cadavros not being killed by the king. I think as we progress through part 2, we'll start to be able to shed some more light on why that could be. But I definitely feel like it's something that we need to keep an eye on. There's something more to that story. Maybe there's a relationship there that we don't know about. So I am curious to see how that evolves. But in terms of Maveth and even what Dolian had mentioned about the baptism, that was my first thought as well. Like when he started talking about this death baptism, I was like, boom, it had something to do with the bone arch. I thought it had to do with her cutting herself or drawing her own blood, maybe mixing with the raven's blood on the bone arch. That was kind of giving her those powers or like rebirthing her into some sort of manifestation of the goddess of death. So that was a really big come to Jesus moment for me. And again, it was something that Keri Lake didn't necessarily have to talk about. And she gave it like a really deep meaning that I think is cool and not necessarily something that we would have gotten in another author's book.
She tends to just kind of like drop these things in, and I just don't think that we would be getting half of this if we weren't spending the time really thinking about it and reviewing it. But you go over these pages that you've read again, and these things jump out, and they're so significant to you, even though the author hasn't spent a lot of time on them. It's a very powerful way to write. The visual of Zevander's eyes really stood out to me, and it kind of made me think about this possibility that his eyes are like mirroring this volcanic vein he was thrown into. Like, we know that Maveth's eyes were marked by her experience, and so maybe Zevander's were too, and that's why we get that like intensity. It kind of like aligns with his personality too. He's got this like edge, this like fieriness, but I love this visual representation coming through in his eyes. Yeah. Now, we talked a little bit about the scene with the beast and the forest and how Morose like kind of offers him this vein that he's found. And it made me wonder, okay, I'm clearly grieving the loss of the Crone Witch already because we have not seen her again yet. Up to, we'll just call it the end of today's episode, no Crone Witch. Unfortunately, we don't know when we're going to see her again. And I just wondered, we were trying to figure out like, where does she fit in? Why does she get to live on like the outskirts of this forest? And I wondered, like, could the Crone Witch be there to guard the vein and like keep it unknown? And maybe particularly from the beast, like maybe she is a bit of like a counterpoint to this like powerless Cadavros. I feel like she's probably connected to the Corvicae people. I feel like the Crone Witch has got a job here, and I think she might be protecting something.
I'm obsessed. I'm so obsessed with that. I remember us trying to figure that out as well. I had thought maybe she was some sort of emissary between Aethyria and Mortasia, but there is obviously something that people in Aethyria want from Mortasia. And so what better reason for the Crone Witch to be stationed outside of that area with watch over the Eating Woods and Mortasia, possibly the vein.
Yeah.
When the Crone Witch originally talks to Maveth about what she's seen in the Eating Woods, I believe that she references, I've seen beasts, I've seen things deeper than your nightmares, or something similar to that. So it does make the connection to the Wrath of War and her possibly guarding over something in Mortasia. I love it.
Also, it's possible she was there when this war happened. Like maybe she knows the origins of all of the Corvicae history, and maybe she's a bit of a beacon for this like prophecy and this like new beginning that feels like it's emerging. We'll see.
In the meantime, we've got Maveth in Zevander's dungeon, and Maveth has a dream about her sister, Alicia, and awakes consumed by sadness that she was either taken or killed by the Morose / Wrath of War beast. When she awakens, she finds Rakea, Zevander's sister, and Rakea begins interrogating Mavis and telling Mavis that she was speaking Nixterosi in her dream. Mavis meets Dolion for the first time, who identifies her first glyph, appearing after the stunt that she pulled at the banishing ceremony. Dolion explains her magic's connection to the Septimere and warns of its immense value, making her a target in Aethyria. Meanwhile, Zevander gets called to see the king and meets Prince Dorjan, who he is assigned to protect. When Zevander joins the king, he ends up in a meeting that kind of took him off guard. He didn't really see it coming. Ends up sitting down with Akmiros, who is a mage superior, and Melantha, an apprentice to the mage lord. And he comes to find out that they are investigating a death of the king's guards that were somehow marked by an aura tied to the Corvakai people. And unfortunately, they suspect that Zevander has something to do with the deaths. So to question him, Zevander is forced to take Nilmirth, which is a truth-telling toxin that inflicts pain each time you try to lie when you've ingested it. I would be screwed. I can't even lie without ingesting Nilmirth, but through Zevander's trainings, he's been able to sort of build up a bit of a tolerance or allow him to kind of resist some of the effects that it has. So he's able to get through that without kind of giving up any of the information that he has relating to Mavis and her possibly being of the Corvakai people. He runs into Melantha and she can somehow sense his deception and suspects that he's cursed with the black flame. So she mentions that it could somehow wreak devastation across the kingdom. And so this is a really big moment for Zevander. He was a loyal servant of the king, but now he's lying to the king face to face, committing acts of treason, hiding bloodstones from him, and so many other secrets from the king and all of his mages. So big turning point for Zevander. And then later, Zevander does meet with the king one-on-one. And the king reveals that the amulet that he wears is referred to as chaos contained. This amulet was actually created at Prince Dorjan's birth, and it's linked to the prince's blood, containing the power to unleash a plague capable of destroying all Nixteros if Dorjan dies. So a lot of lore behind this random amulet in this random meeting. Like Keri just won't cut us a break here. And the biggest part about this amulet is that the king actually connects this amulet to Kadavros, who is the one who bound the amulet to Dorjan's bloodline. So again, that just adds more layers, layer upon layer, to Dolion's vision of the devastation that could come. We find out the king's relationship again with Kadavros is a thing. My thought is that the king made a bargain with Kadavros. We know Kadavros does these bargains. We just don't know if there was a bargain between the king and Kadavros, what the other end of the bargain is quite yet. If Kadavros was willing to save or protect the king's son, the prince's life, what did Kadavros ask for in return?
Yeah.
We know that the king called the amulet chaos contained. So could it have connections with something else that we might hear a little bit more about in this part? Is there another force in this realm potentially that is part of this amulet?
I mean, it's very possible. Can I just say, how dumb do you have to be to have an amulet made that contains chaos that's connected to your child's life? Like,
Right.
This guy sucks. Like, I hate this guy. I was so mad when I read this, like, physically upset. You thought this was a good idea. You thought befriending Kadavros was a good idea. You thought that having an amulet made that is going to wield destruction and plagues on your entire kingdom if your child dies We know that the king wants people to think that he killed Cadavros, but like we know that he didn't. Dolian is very confident that Cadavros is not dead, and the king has lied about whatever he has done to Cadavros. I mean, shocking to me that people would think that he has the capability to kill this guy. He's like the biggest, baddest mage to ever exist, but he's convinced people of that. There's something interesting going on in this scene to me where you pick up on the fact that the king trusts Zevander. For what reason has the king decided to trust or like appreciate Zevander? He's trusting him with this information when he's being interrogated by these mages who are supposed to be his like most respected support. They're wizards, you know? He's quietly over there like, yeah, I knew you had nothing to do with it. Why does the king value Zevander more than just being his trained assassin? And also, we know that Zevander is like straight up lying to him and he's doing blood magic.
I can't fully get a read on the king and why he was so quick to let Zevander off the hook for that. There's still something about it that just doesn't sit quite right.
I agree. Like he doesn't have a he doesn't appear to have that kind of a relationship with the other Letalis.
Yeah.
Zevander is an exception. And he's kind of held in high regard, even how they talk about the meetings he gets invited into and how it's typically like he knows about things in advance. So there is something. And we are going to talk a little bit more about the Rydane family. And I do have some suspicions about maybe this could be where this like favoritism comes from. But before we move on, I have to say, I hate Melantha. I'm just going to put it out there. I hate this bitch. I know she's not good news. And like she's fucking around with Zevander like on day one, and I don't like it. Like I don't like her seeing through him. He's gone to all this effort to swallow this poison and keep himself from like messing his pants right up in the middle of the friggin' snake lake by the gates. But it did make me wonder, like I am getting like evil vibes from this woman, and they did not seem to be focused on the king's interest in this exchange. It seems like they have their own agenda. They're interrogating Zevander for their own purposes. Maybe they are working for Cadavros. We know that they're like hunting for the bloodstones themselves, maybe trying to like use the advantage that like they somehow know that Zevander and Dolian are working together on these bloodstones. It just makes me wonder if all these kind of points are coming together and maybe he's breeding somehow this like group of dark mages under the king's nose.
That's so interesting.
Zevander goes and visits Maveth in the dungeon. And once again, she wants to leave. She wants to go back to the woods. She wants to find her sister. And he says no. One more time, no. And he tells her that she needs to do some magic training. She needs to figure her stuff out. Maveth is not really into it. She keeps begging. She wants to go and see her sister. And Zevander delivers one of these killer lines in this part that I love. He says, "Beg all you like." He let out a sardonic chuckle. "I'd quite like to see you on your knees." And triggers Maveth immediately. And she throws a big old bowl of soup at his face. After that whole exchange, they need to cool down. Zevander goes and talks to Dolian, and they talk about how important it is that they protect these bloodstones and Maveth. And Dolian convinces Zevander to be the one that trains Maveth, which he doesn't want to do. He's not really a people person. He's not really a teacher type. But Dolian makes a really good point that Zevander didn't have any training on developing his sable fire magic. So he's actually the perfect candidate to guide this beautiful young woman in developing her goddess of death magic, just like he did. So Dolian suggests that Maveth's powers also might hold the answers to Zevander's sable fire curse. Another advantage to getting a little close, maybe. And Zevander thinks to himself, Dolian's words rang true. Since the night he'd snuck into the girl's room with every intent to kill her, she'd roused a maddening plague in his mind. Why couldn't he kill her? Why had the flame he'd known his whole life turned on him? So Zevander reflects on his inability to kill Maveth. He's plagued by these thoughts, and he realizes, like, I have these moments where I can't control it, this fire, and it longs to break free. Dolian tells him that your power was forged by the gods. It wasn't meant to be controlled or wielded by mancers. Now, can I just say, this is the first instance where we really have highlighted the fact that Zevander's power is also connected to the gods. This feels significant. Rakaya takes Maveth to Zevander's quarters and gives her a chance to take a bath. They have this like really nice exchange where Rakaya offers her some empathy and support connected to Maveth's painful past and how she was labeled as a curse and the guilt that she feels over the childhood incident where she was called a witch and a curse and she was bullied in the streets, and then she wished for this girl to be trampled, and then minutes later she was run down by a horse. And Rakaya, who is so lovely, embraces her uniqueness and doesn't see it as a curse at all and tells her, I find it interesting that anytime a girl is unusual, or dare I say unique, she's deemed evil or cursed. I've also learned to survive on the mere crumbs of social graces. Like you, I've grown thin and weary from it. I'm sorry they treated you so horribly, but I'm not sorry. She's dead. And I love Rakaya, making our girl feel good. And dare I say, little connections to our Foxglove conversation earlier on here about our uniqueness and our power.
This is giving very much like feminist uprising. So I love that she's already sticking up for Maveth, and there's kind of that sisterhood bond forging. It really does kind of take me back to the beginnings when we were in Foxglove and seeing all this control over women and, you know, religion as a form of control.
Mm-hmm.
But like this little sisterhood is coming together, and that feels very feminist. And I'm excited to see how that continues to evolve for them.
So Maveth has a bath. She allows herself to grieve Alicia, which she really needs. She needs to just get it out. And strangely, Zevander's voice comes into her mind while she's bathing and having these thoughts and grief around Alicia. And it tells her that Alicia made her own choices and Maveth wasn't responsible. And so she shouldn't feel responsible for the results and what happened at the end of the day. Quickly thereafter, Zevander basically like walks in on Maveth as she's finishing her bath, manages to not see her naked, and they have this super kind of cute and awkward exchange. Maveth is super embarrassed because apparently Zevander did not know she would be using his bath or his soap or his clothing and did not give permission for any of these things. But she offers an apology. She feels really awkward and weird about it. And also thinks to herself, I had never stood before a man so virile, so wildly masculine in my life. There was something dangerously seductive about him, leaving me feeling too warm beneath the tunic. A deadly allure, fitting for the kind of man who could whisper honeyed words in your ears as he ran a blade through your heart.
Keri Lake! Even just the way that she writes that, like she could just write like that for the whole entire book. I don't need any spice. Like that's as long as she writes so poetically.
The slow burn is burning and we love it. And
Right?
it's poetry. It really is poetry and it's so much fun. And we're not even done yet because in this little exchange, we get a little pet name from Zevander that gives me so much joy. So for the first time, Zevander refers to her as Luna Mishka. That's how I'm going to pronounce it. And there is this kind of air like maybe he is fond of her, but he kind of says it with a little smirk and explains nothing, and that's it. So we don't know what this means, but we do like that Zevander's come up with his own name for her because that can only mean good things.
I'm in the pet name camp as long as they're super cute. And Luna Mishka is kind of like, it's giving Russian, like hot Russian mafia man. And I feel like that's very suiting of Zevander. I love Rakaya for being a little shit and putting Zevander. I feel that she's totally doing this on purpose. And I love the angst that we're getting. I feel like we're getting some big angst from Zevander. He doesn't really know now, right, how he's going to fix this curse. If we think back to him talking to Dolion and Dolion saying, we're not killing her anymore. Sorry, dude. We're going to have to find another way. And then two, he's flirting with her. And I don't feel like he seems to be the flirty type. It seems to be coming kind of natural to him. Like a nickname already?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's like he can't resist. And I have to think, Zevander is in survival mode. He's just trying to not end up like Branimir. I think he's probably afraid that what he's experienced, he will continue to experience in his life, which does not lend itself to a life of like loving connection. So I can kind of see where his like hard exterior and his like restricted approach to other people comes from. But I also love that the nature of the situation is chipping away at him and he just cannot resist the orange scented death goddess child who is prancing around his little keep that he's got.
Prancing around the keep naked in his bath.
In his little tunic, she's wearing his tunic.
Oh my
Basically,
God.
we're already in the oversized button down shirt, the boyfriend jeans.
Right? Yes. I could talk about this part in the book for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
Because, yeah, this was our first taste of the yearning. So Mavis wakes up in the dungeon. She feels homesick and starts to reminisce about singing to her sister, Alicia. She starts to hum Alicia's favorite song and somehow draws out this black spider from the shadows of her cell. She sees it creeping along. It appears by the entrance, seemingly because of her singing, swaying as if lulled by a lullaby, by her melody. While preparing to defend herself from the spider, she accidentally pricks her finger on the book that she's holding, and a drop of her blood activates the book's intricate mechanism. The blood slipped through the maze quickly, like a bead of mercury moving of its own will, until it filled what looked like a skinny vial. A click echoed through the cell, and I flinched. The machinations of the book quickly became clear as small gears wound on their own and the bird's eye opened over a lever. I stared at it a moment, attempting to puzzle its purpose, then reached into the eye and turned the lever with a click, and the cover popped open. So much to say about that. So she opens the book. The first page centers on a castle with magical lettering transforming into the name Orvis Keep, with silver embossed markings and imagery of these raven-eyed people. We get a woman named Morsana that's depicted, our girl Morsana, surrounded by black birds and white mist, her silver eyes captivating Mavis. Above Morsana, bird-like dragons with crescent moon marks breathe silvery flames, battling golden armored dragon riders in gruesome clash. Each creature carried a silver marking like the one I'd seen on Ravox, a crescent moon, the same mark that marred my eye. The text reveals a history of an attack by men with yellow hair and steel weapons seeking the vein, defended fiercely by Morsana and her warriors. The men with yellow hair and steel weapons came upon us in the night. They sought the vein, but we did not relent. For this land is ours, and by the strength of Morsana, we defend it.
Does this not sound like Mortasia?
It does. It does. And like we're finally seeing the significance of the vein that Mr. Moreau's found and the parallel that we're seeing in the past and possibly history repeating itself here. So from the book, as Mavis is going through and reading this book, she is feeling some sort of visceral connection to the imagery that she's seeing. From the book, a violet glow drew my eyes to a crevice that ran along the castle. And when I glided my finger over it, a white hot sting pricked my fingertips. Within the dark and scorching chasm, a black fire flickered and moved, and a figure rose up, as if some being had been swallowed by the flame. Careful not to touch the flame, I slipped my thumb across the symbols. Deimos appeared. Something about the name sent a shiver down my spine. I studied the figure in the flame a moment longer, and for reasons I couldn't explain, my heart clenched.
So much.
Like, I can't breathe.
Just want to swim in that paragraph for like a good hour. Like there was so much happening.
Oh, the silvery flames of the black dragon birds sent the golden dragon riders plunging toward the ground in a fiery ball of death. Who were the armored men? What had happened to the raven warriors? Had they survived? What was trapped inside that black flame? A subsequent page contains a circular puzzle resembling a multifaceted clock, with symbols etched within and along its edges. Mavis decides to stop exploring for the day and take a break, overwhelmed by its secrets. I too am overwhelmed. by the secrets, Maeve. And then, of course, she's anxious about the return of the spiders. So she just tries to take her mind off of this whole thing. And to end this part, she says, the first and only thought I could summon was Zevander.
Someone's got a crush.
Oh my god, it's finally happening. The lore is luring. Like, it is so intense. At this point, I remember going to bed way later than normal, just stirring with no one to talk to because Sarah and I are saving it for right now.
We are sworn to secrecy. We cannot feel the thoughts and feelings if we are not on the episode.
Oh my god, it was just so intense. I'm fully convinced Maeve, yes, she's a manifestation of the goddess of death, or is doing her bidding somehow, and then this visceral reaction to Deimos. What do we think, Sarah?
First, I would like to say that I never knew how badly I needed a book made of bones and feathers and puzzles. And now I really want one. Like, I will give up my blood to open the book. Like, it's fine. I would just like one of these magical things that can burn my fingers and reveal fancy words to me. I would like to have that experience.
I love it.
I loved it when she touched the flame and it burned her. We've got a vein, we've got the flame. It does kind of sound like the environment that Cadavros and the Rydane family were around in the earlier parts of the story. And this, like, what were these flames? What's inside of them? It's feeling very connected to our man, Zevander, who, again, if we think now Dolian is telling him your powers are connected to a god, there definitely is the potential that there's a very ancient element to this. And this Deimos character, who we are going to learn a little bit about shortly, we know that he is based on the idea of a Greek god, and this idea that his like strengths are in like fear and terror and battle,
Chaos.
and chaos.
Yeah.
Yes.
This is like, I could not sleep. I could not do anything. And my poor husband was like, what are you talking? Like, I don't care about who Deimos and Maveth are. Like, I don't care. So I'm so glad that it's finally all out in the open. They have to be twin flames somehow in this relationship that each of them have with these two old gods coming together in this prophecy. How else can you justify that they feel familiar to each other and they have this attraction?
You just can't. That's the thing. You just can't justify it. Mavis kind of like ends off her little day, like we said, goes to sleep thinking of Zevander, which we love. We hope she has sweet dreams. She wakes by Rakaya, and Rakaya tells her this story, this tale of Bellatula. She calls her Bellatula, and she's like, what are you talking about? And she tells her this story about a dancer who made a dark pact with a demon like Malvol, or a bad spirit or demon. Now, I only mention this because, as we've said about 17 times in this episode already, is that we are very sure that Keri Lake doesn't include things like this without there being a reason. And so I have to think that this is some sort of creative foreshadowing she has woven in here for us. It's also not a happy story. The girl makes a deal with this devil and she wants to be like dancing in front of a crowd and everyone looking at her, and he wants her heart, and she says, okay, sure, yeah, you can have my heart. And then he like rips it out of her chest at the end of this dance. So interesting choice, Rakaya. Like, what are you seeing here in terms of similarities to our girl? But shedding a little bit of light on this random story we get. So Rakaya tosses Maveth some leather gear. She tells her to get dressed for training, and as a way to kind of motivate Maveth, who doesn't seem to care at all about training, she tells her sometimes the best way to summon your powers is when you fear for your life. So go work with these Letalese and deal with it. Through this little exchange, they're having little banter, and sneaky little Rakaya admits that she may have orchestrated a little awkward bath encounter between Maveth and Zevander. And Maveth asks, like, why would you send him there when I asked you for privacy? And Rakaya responds saying, because I'm horrible at following orders. And you should know that going forward. If you tell me to do something, chances are I'm going to fail somehow. Once again, why do I feel like this is very intentional that we're getting this information right now? Rakaya taunts Maveth about Alicia's fate, about the fact that Maveth thinks that she's probably dead. And she's kind of trying to prompt her into feeling something and playing this game to see if she has powers. And she does succeed. Maveth summons her first glyph, airs, and it leaves 3 permanent marks etched on her palm. Rakaya goes on to explain how glyphs work. They're tied to bloodlines, and the first time you successfully summon one, it creates a permanent imprint on your skin. And Rakaya tells how she's an empath and she inherited them from her mother. So she feels and she absorbs the emotions of others, but only when she wants to. Maveth remembers Zevander's hands and the scars he has all over it, and she realizes that they're glyphs and he must be very, very powerful. So Rakaya tells her, he's a bit of an anomaly. Most Lunaseer only have 1 or 2 major glyphs, and more can be learned, but it takes years, and only those who study at the House of Sages are given access to other glyphs. So Zevander's kind of like 1 in a million. Rakaya goes on to share some insights about the magical races. Maveth is finally asking some questions and really trying to understand this world. So we get some really helpful explanations that we haven't had before. She explains Lunaseers. They are moon-powered mancers, such as Rakaya and Zevander. And Maveth asks, I thought you got your power from blood. And she says, yes, we do, but it requires nutrients and energy. And without the moon, our powers are weak. Opposing the Lunaseers are the Celestians, so they are sun-powered counterpoints. And we have the Elvenira, glyph wielders who draw power through spiritual connection rather than their bloodline. And Dolian is one of the Elvenira. This mage lord is proficient in pretty much all of the glyphs, and he could wield sable fire, for example, but he could never match the strength of Zevander's abilities because Zevander was cursed with it. We know that sable fire is a black flame and it's capable of disintegrating anything it touches. And we also learn about the scorpions, who I've gotten a little bit of whispers about. Also, one of the other Letalis has a basilisk marking. So they're called their Pradoja, and they are a protective form of blood magic that appear in the form of an animal or an instinct, and they unfailingly manifest in the form of whatever magic the person wields, which is kind of an interesting parallel to this blood baptism between the babies and the raptors that we learned about in the Korvakai people. Now, Maveth puts her leathers on. She puts trousers on for the first time and feels simultaneously empowered and exposed. I turned around, not sure if I felt fully clothed or fully exposed. The way the garments emphasized every curve of my body. And she tells Rakaya how she wore the same restrictive dress and choker every single day as a symbol of her cursed status. And Rakaya asks her, what for? And she says, well, all cursed women wore them. And Rakaya says, it seems that you and Lord Rydane have something in common then. The mask. He's required to wear it in public, but I think he chooses to wear it most other times. Dolian informs Maveth that she's going to be training with Zevander, and she has a fortnight to master her glyphs. And if she is successful, then they will allow her to leave Eidolon's keep. But if she fails, then she has to stay there forever. And he also promises her to scry and try to see if they can figure out where Alicia is and whether she's survived. Maveth updates Dolian on this mysterious book that she's found, that he's given her, and how he believes it to be a relic of the Corvi bloodline, the mortal race that was nearly annihilated and cast into the Kershurian Trench. And they suspect that she is of this bloodline and of this race of mortals. So I have a couple questions here. Lady Rydane the Empath. This is kind of like the first little crumb that we've gotten about Lady Rydane. It made me wonder, when we first met Rakaya, Zevander talks about how the men in the brothels took a liking to her, and it seemed to have something to do with her abilities and maybe being vulnerable and how she could feel their feelings. Mm-hmm. So if Lady Rydane was also an empath, could this be why he seemed to have a fondness for her? I do kind of wonder if maybe the king had a little bit of a crush maybe on Lady Rydane.
I'm fully obsessed. I didn't even think about the connection there of Lady Rydane being an empath and what that could possibly mean for her. Let's go back to the prologue. We've got Branimir, who was cursed and unfortunately succumbed to his wounds, and his curse is way different than how it's manifested in Zevander. Maybe after that, Lady Rydane was like, shit, I need to do something to protect my other child and maybe used her powers to somehow manipulate the king or who? Someone? I don't know. But I always wondered why that was never touched on again. Like Zevander's family just kind of like said, fuck these two boys. Like, we're just going to bargain you off like pawns. Maybe there was more to that. You know?
We are getting very piecemeal details around his family and how they all kind of fell apart on this thing with Cadavros. So I think we're intentionally being led into this mysterious bubble and left to try to figure it out ourselves.
Yeah, it's crazy making behavior. Where my brain is taking me right now, if Keri Lake saw this, she would probably be like, what the fuck? Or maybe we're right. We should totally revisit some of this stuff at the end of this series, because I want to see where we were horribly wrong and where we were actually maybe close.
I agree. I mean, like, I'm not afraid to throw a crazy ass theory out there that I would rather say out loud and be wrong than not say it at all and then be right. But I was having a moment when I was reading this content and I was thinking, could Zevander be the king's child? Could the reason that Dolian sees him being connected to a plague and destruction, just like the king describes with his amulet, be to do with Zevander instead of Dorjan or his firstborn? And like it does feel like probably this is a stretch. I think Zevander was born already when the king saved Lady Rydane and the curse had happened. But it feels, again, bizarrely coincidental that the way that the visions and the king's amulet are being described and have so many parallels, especially when we are getting this air that the king held a favoritism for Lady Rydane, and he clearly also favors Zevander.
This is so good. This is so good. I 100% think that like this is real.
This is real.
Oh my God. To your point about it being a stretch and that a lot of these things happened after Zevander was born, don't we get a sense at some part in this that the king has affairs?
I think we get the sense that he does not have a queen. Like we get no indication that there is a queen or a wife.
Right.
So yes, we can maybe think about how the king gets on.
Okay. I have a theory that I just have to throw out there. I want to plant a seed.
Okay.
So I know Dolian is like the cutest, sweetest seeming man, but he is red flags for me. He is red flags for me. I feel like he holds his cards so close to his chest. He never ever gives us the full picture on anything that's happening. I feel like he's always speaking in riddles. And even if we think of like the different bloodlines of the characters, I feel like we have so much more of an understanding of like the moon magic and the sun magic and how those play into the different bloodlines. But now we've got the Elvenira. It just makes me wonder, why is he so invested in this story? Like, we don't know. He's given us zero inkling other than maybe just raw passion and his visions as to why he is so invested. There's also times in the story where he hasn't necessarily divulged the full answer to questions people ask. I don't trust his intentions. I'm not saying they're bad. I just don't think that we know the whole story here.
I think that Dolian has a guilty conscience. I think that Dolian, whatever occurred that led Dolian and Zevander into this working relationship for the Septimir, however that went down, Dolian bit off way more than he could chew, and he overlooked all kinds of risks and red flags, and now he is like faced directly with them, and I think he is just like scampering around trying to get the people who are now attached to the idea of the Septimir to like cool their jets and like realize that there's other things at play here. And he's going to be the one that's held to blame if the Septimir comes to light and destructs like all of Aethyria.
There's just so many wild theories going back and forth here. And I really do think that we should come back to these and see if we're right or wrong. Meanwhile, in the training arena, Zevander teases Maveth with subtle compliments on her new leathers. When Maveth expresses doubts about her appearance being intimidating, Zevander delivers a line that literally had me kicking and screaming. He says, "You don't have to look threatening to be threatening. Perceived weakness is your most vicious weapon."
Favorite quote so far. Oh my God.
Right? And I love the yearning. Like, it's so slow. This is so slow, and it's really just starting to heat up now. Swear that I blush every single time I run into one of these scenes. I'm obsessed. And then we've got Zevander. He removes his jacket. He reveals his muscular tattooed arms adorned with scorpions and black fire, commanding Maveth's attention. Carved, muscled arms displayed inky black images of scorpions and black fire that stretched from the top of his hands to his bicep. The honey tones in his skin and the jet black of his hair starkly contrasted his sister's silvery hair and ivory complexion. Brutal and fierce were the only words that came to mind while I stared back at him. He was a man who commanded attention, and I found it nearly impossible to avert my gaze. As he strode toward me, my heart drummed a frantic rhythm against my ribs, like the erratic creature might break right out of its cage. Doesn't it just give you chills all over your body?
It does. And I just have to talk about this line for 1 second because I just think it's like mind boggling how she uses her words and she elicits a description here that makes you think of a bird in a cage. Meanwhile, Maveth has this little Ravox creature that's basically connected to her soul. And it's just like this subtle thing that's thrown in here about how she feels about Zevander. And I just think it's like magic.
And again, nothing is on accident in these Keri Lake books. So next, Zevander introduces Maveth to the Air's glyph, meaning wind's vengeance, and he pushes her super hard during training. Maveth does revisit the bone whip technique, which we learn is what she used during the encounter at Alicia's banishment, and Dolian identifies it as os flagul, a rare and formidable ability to shatter bones in a single strike. Zevander's teaching style is merciless and demands perfection. And Dolian explains that Zevander's harsh methods seem to stem from his own upbringing. He says, I suspect he trains this way because he refuses to watch you fail. In his mind, such a thing would be his own failure. Maveth finally succeeds channeling Ares powerfully, and the glyph glows silvery blue on her skin, representing a major glyph, surprising Dolian, who thought it only to be a minor glyph. So sounds like both Maveth and Zevander are outliers as far as glyphs go. Dolian shares a little bit about Zevander's tragic history. He shares that King Sagarin executed all followers of Cadavros, but spared the Redain family due to Lady Redain's relationship with the crown. Dolian, that's very vague. However, to appease the Selassians, the king handed Zevander and his father over, who had many enemies, most notably the captain of the Selassian army. Zevander witnessed his father's execution and was enslaved in Selassian mines. Meanwhile, his sister, Lady Redain, endured unspeakable atrocities as further punishment. And for reasons that Dolian admits to not understanding, King Sagarin later bought Zevander's freedom. I think Dolian knows more than what he says he knows.
Okay.
I don't trust it.
You don't trust
So, again, major yearning. We're getting some big flirts, big respect to how slow this is going. I always say that I love smut, but there is something about how this is being built up so slowly that really does it for me. And this is why I get so addicted to Keri Lake books like a drug. So I'm here for it.
Yes. I'm going to go wild right now. Like, this is like peak theorizing for me. My brain exploded the other night when I was working on my notes for this. I felt like I was trapped inside of the book with the wheels and the symbols and the scorpions and the moon signs and all the things clicking into place because I have so many thoughts. So the king spared the Rydane family. This is another suggestion. We talked about this, I think, in the last episode, that there's the possibility it was connected to the Eidolon's Keep. And why is it called Eidolon's Keep? And that maybe it had to do with her, Lady Rydane.
Yeah.
Her last name wouldn't be Rydane originally. That'd be her married name, presumably. And so this felt to me like another suggestion that maybe Zevander's mother was quite powerful or important because she was close with the crown. Is that how that was described? So there's something going on there that again, you're right. We have not heard all the details on that. Do we think that the king would have known about the curse and the sable fire at this point in time? Like when he saves the family, maybe he did. And maybe he knew that if this child survives, there's a potential for him to be a weapon that he could use. And maybe knowing that since during all this stuff, he didn't actually kill Cadavros, maybe he was going to need some security if Cadavros ever came back, and if he banked on this family and this boy who survived, then maybe he was going to be able to get that return and secure himself and his family. Because, like, why else would the king risk not killing Cadavros? Like, there's something going on here that I feel like we need to understand. Like, it feels like he somehow secured his safety by befriending the Ridanes or Zevander and saving him. But like, there's something going on that's connected to him not killing Cadavros if he actually had the chance. Like, we don't know if he did have the chance, but if we're assuming the truth is what everyone knows, he did have the chance and then he didn't. So what could be motivating that? Like, why wouldn't he have killed him?
There could be so much to this. If we go back to Lady Redane and her influence, could her influence somehow have been the reason why Brandimir's fate was worse than Zevander's? Like, are the markings on Zevander somehow to do with like some protection that she was able to influence somebody putting on Zevander so that he came out a little bit less scathed than Brandimir? So that was like one of my thoughts. Okay, Cadavros. Why did the king not kill Cadavros? So we've seen some of the disparity between the rich and the poor in this kingdom that the king has created. We've seen that they rely on Vivicantum to fuel their magic, and the king seems to have that in overwhelming supply, but then there's these villagers called the Nilivir that don't have any. And so there's like this rich-poor divide. What if Cadavros, the connection between Cadavros and Mr. Morose, is something that we're a little bit deeper rooted than everything we're seeing here right now? And what if that is why he kept Cadavros alive, to find the Vivicantum vein in Mortasia? Even the fact that Mr. Morose and Cadavros kind of like melded, and to me, for some reason, they haven't been described as separate entities. Like, those two are interrelated, and that maybe Mr. Morose's research for this vein has something to do with the bargain that the king made with Cadavros.
So I think you could be onto something here, that there's a connection and a power dynamic that's been built. You know, I love like polarizing characters, and I also kind of love this idea that our kind of like foolish king who's done things that make no sense, maybe that's just like part of his ploy, is to act like he's kind of not all that powerful, all that with it. And behind the scenes, he's a mastermind, that at least he's controlling the one element that he knows could bring down their entire continent if they didn't have it anymore.
Totally. And I don't think that the king is necessarily like the chess master that's controlling all the pawns. I think that there's so many different like sub layers of like intricate relationships that are being built amongst these people. I think that, yes, he's in a position of power and playing his own game, but I don't think his game is the grandest of all. I think he's a pawn in something else.
I agree.
Definitely something there.
I agree. I think he's looking at what's right in front of him and he's missing the entire landscape. And we're starting to see the greater story here. Like, do you think that he's caught wind of this whole Septimir situation at all?
I think he might know what the Magistroli maybe are willing to tell him. I have a feeling that they respect the king, but they're almost above the king in some way because of their powers.
Yeah, my hunch is that he doesn't know about it, and that they're playing into his hand in terms of the power dynamic that allows them to have the power they need and to move forward with this item that they know has so much potential to change the game. And he's not asking about it. He doesn't know. He's not smart enough to piece it together, so they don't have to tell him anything. I have some questions about the Ridanes. Looking back on their history now, we've gotten like a pretty good summary of what went down in the prologue, and then now some of the history around Cadavros and the Salassians and that kind of like exchange of hands. We know Lady Ridane is not alive. I don't think that we know what happened to her. We kind of know what happened to everyone else. So we know that they made a deal with Cadavros to save them from the Salassians. But the king had all of Cadavros's followers killed. So this must mean that the Salassians were after this family before all this stuff took place, because we know Zevander was really young when he went into the mines. So the Rydanes are being kind of like hounded by the Salassians. They went to Cadavros to seek support in getting away from the Salassians. Somewhere along the lines, the king killed everyone who was following Cadavros. They had made this bargain with Cadavros, so they were kind of like in the firing line, but then they were protected, but also given to the Salassians who they were originally hiding from. So if the king had a fondness for Lady Rydane, this is something that we know had existed, then why didn't she just like go to the king for help when the Salassians were coming for them, rather than going to Cadavros, who's this terrible mage who locks her in a bargain? She must not have thought that she could go to the king for help, is what I think. And I don't know why. But then he abolished all of the followers and he rescues Lady Rydane and Rakaya. And they were forced to do unthinkable things. By whom? Like, who? We don't know who, and we don't really know where they go. Potentially the Salassians. Could it be that he wanted Lord Rydane out of the picture? That the king wanted to be rid of him? And that because Lord Rydane had a conflict with the Salassians, maybe the king just let it play out and like left them with no options. And they had to go to help from Cadavros. And then this beautiful miracle happens where the baby is cursed and he actually survives. And then he becomes a weapon. Worst case, the baby and Branimir are just gone, maybe leaving room for Lady Rydane to get with the king. And maybe like he wants her to become his queen.
That is so good. Because that was my question too. I'm like, we're missing so much about the Salassians. Like, we know that Zevander was tortured by the Salassians, and we know that Zevander's father had some sort of conflict, but there's really no understanding of what happened before that to cause that situation, or really after that necessarily. Like, we're missing so much context. I almost wonder if that theory were true, which I love that theory. Could the king have somehow figured out that Zevander could possibly be his son rather than just Prince Dorjan?
Right. Like, that is like this kind of like inkling little thing I have in my brain is like, was Lady Rydane at one point the king's consort? Or like, I don't know, maybe they just had like a super friendly kind of like unestablished relationship and she got pregnant and what's she gonna do? Like, it's the king, but then they're getting chased by these Salassians. Like, there are a lot of different things kind of happening here, but I do have a sneaking suspicion that there's a reason that the king has this favoritism towards Zevander. And the piece that I'm waiting to find out is what happened to Lady Rydane. We need to know what happened to her, and we don't know yet. So back into our story, we get some new arrivals at Eidolon's Keep. We presume that they are mages from Calixar, which is where Dolian is from. So one of the mages, Allura, is a bone scribe. She examines the bones that Maveth manifests during training and tells her that they are real bones, that they've been cast and they are from people who lived hundreds of years ago, further underscoring the power of Maveth's Osflagul abilities. So Maveth, Dolian, and Allura then conduct a scrying ceremony. And there's this phrase repeated over and over again, and Maveth starts to feel anxious and her heart starts racing, and it feels like there's something scratching at her chest trying to get out. A feeling that is kind of similar to what we just heard. But she hears this feminine whisper in her mind. Ancient gods, we call upon your vision and wisdom. And her muscles jolt and her head kicks back and she sees this like bright flash of light. And then she sees Alicia and her hair is kind of cut and she's got cut marks behind her ear. She's not looking great, but it does seem like she's alive. And there is a fire burning in a hearth beneath her. She couldn't quite tell whether she was alive or dead. But then Alicia shifts in the blankets that covered her, and her vision snaps to black, and we learn that Maveth has fallen off of her chair. So Maveth awakes, and she recounts her experience to the other two, and realizes that she actually understood the ritual's words that were being spoken, and they were being spoken in Primaria, a language of the gods, which was known to be spoken thousands of years ago. It's not a language people really know. They also kind of call her out on the fact that she's speaking next to Rosie again, not Vonkovian, and she still can't believe that that's happening. Dolian validates the significance of these language abilities that she has, and he assures her that the gods don't abide by mortal limitations. And he says, then, the gods shared their vision after all. The gods don't abide by the rules of what should be Maveth. So we're getting this sense that, the rules don't really apply to her, and that's perfectly fine, and kind of like stop questioning it. Dolian and Maveth start studying the book that she unlocked, and she reveals this tragic story of Deimos and Mortasia that's written into the pages of the book. They look at it together, and it appears to be the story of Deimos and Mortasia. Mortasia was a death goddess. It was said that her eyes were so strikingly silver, no mortal creature dared to look at her, except for Deimos. He was a feared warrior for an ancient tribe who conquered lands and killed without remorse. Some believed the god of chaos inhabited him, and Mortasia was said to have sought him so relentlessly she followed him into every battle, disguised as a flock of ravens. With every victory, her endeavors to claim his soul withered, and soon she fell in love with the brave mortal, who did not so much as flinch in her presence. He offered his kills as a gift to her, and his people worshipped the once feared goddess. But Magekai, the god of dark alchemy, was obsessed with her, and he had been since the dawn of time. He was furious over her love for a mortal, so he took matters into his own hands. He armed the enemies of Deimos with a powerful magic that turned them immortal, strengthened by daylight, which made them undefeatable by the mortals. And so, the Selasians came to be, and they conquered the lands that Deimos had claimed for his people. Unfortunately, Magekai and his immortals prevailed. They cast Deimos into sable fire to burn for eternity and slaughtered his people. Magekai then imprisoned Mortasia for many years and was determined never to marry the corrupt god. Mortasia took the form of a raven and managed to escape. And that is why it's believed the raven carried the souls of the dead to Aethyria. Does Deimos not sound like Zevander? Does Mortasia not sound like our beautiful little Maveth incarnate?
I mean, if I had one theory that wasn't totally insane, it would be this one. Whether they are in the flesh or not, like Zevander and Maveth are definitely manifestations of these two gods. I feel like there's been so many hints towards this, especially with Zevander and Eidolon's Keep, like the shadows. The Zevander described them as the Deimosi and said that they are fears left behind by the dead. But why are there so many Deimosi manifesting at Zevander's home? I don't know that we've seen them anywhere else. And they're described as these like shadows moving in and out of the walls.
It feels like these old gods, I mean, Deimos is kind of based on a god, but was not a god, but maybe through this horrific incident managed to become a god granted with that power. It feels like they're out for vengeance. And if they are going to rebalance the scales of what they were owed, this life where they can truly love each other and get back at this Magekai character, now maybe is their chance with these two who seem to embody all of the energy that their past selves had.
So I have another theory, and this one's crazy. But so if we think about the story of Mortasia and Deimos, we've prophesized and thought so much about them, but then this Magekai is just thrown in here. What about him? Who is he linked to, right? So my theory is that he could be linked to Dolian somehow.
You hate Dolian.
No, I actually love him. And I don't know if his intentions are like horrific and evil, but there's something about him. Like either he is some sort of manifestation of Magekai or he knows about this prophecy and just has remained quiet about it somehow. Like he's complicit in it right now. But again, Dolian hasn't been fully forthcoming with his visions or agenda. And like, I don't think he's necessarily I think he's a gray character, not one to be like good or bad. I think how could he possibly be using Zevander and Maveth to serve his own means rather than this evil villain that's kind of coming to be? there's something there for me.
Yeah. Okay. I like that. I like this. It's feeling a little like unique. So I'm liking it. Now,
Right?
I do have a counter theory to your theory. What if it is not Dolian? And what if Majkai never died while Deimos and Morsaena died? Maybe Morsaena was part of this group that got thrown into the trench. Maybe that's the vision that Maveth had of Morsaena being thrown into the trench with all of these monsters. But maybe Magekai managed to survive. Maybe it's Cadavros and he's managed to reincarnate himself or embody himself in a human being's form over and over again, like Morose in the forest.
Right.
And these other two are now coming back to get vengeance and to win the battle that they never started with him, but they absolutely would love to finish.
Oh my God. Yeah, I love that too. I can totally see that as well. I just feel like Dolian is in on this somehow. Like he's not innocent. Like he knows things. I feel like he's this wise old man that's just like, in time, young grasshopper. Like he's not willing to like show all of his cards.
Yes.
You know, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't trust Dolian fully, and I feel like there is more. I feel like he knows more than he's saying.
He does like give off the vibe of a character who like has debts and has been unable to pay his debts. And so he's being used as a tool that maybe there will come like a breaking point here where it is revealed that like he was left with no options and he just like had to do this to survive and he was playing them or he was doing whatever. Like I could fully see that happening with Dolian. I need to talk about this language thing that's going on with Maveth because now it's come up like 7 times and I had to look into this because it's kind of like familiar and there is like a word for it. So it's called xenoglossy or sometimes known as xenolalia, and it's the paranormal phenomenon in which a person is allegedly able to speak, write, or understand a foreign language that they could not have acquired by natural means. And that the word derives from ancient Greek, xenos for foreigner, and glossa for tongue and language. And it does not seem accidental to me that we have yet another ancient Greek reference here that's coming to play. But I kind of love this idea that while it has been highlighted by like a glyph, Maveth has the secret skill, which is her xenolalia and her ability to just like imbue herself in languages that she's never really experienced before. And I think that is kind of like a subtle thing that we've seen so far, but I think it's going to evolve to be one of her like most powerful elements because like she can speak to the gods. That's what we have seen. She is probably the only one who can speak the language of the gods, let alone what other languages we don't know.
So next, Maveth discovers a clock-like mechanism in the book. Its glyphs aligned with the moon phases. Turning it activates a hauntingly beautiful song, and the mechanism clicks into place. We've got a scorpion, Aries to flame, and 2 half moons uniting as a full moon. Fully loaded. Inside is a pristine black rose edged with metallic silver petals. Turning the page reveals an image of Morsaena placing a similar rose to the one I clutched right then on a baby's chest, ravens flocking around the bassinet. The accompanying text reads, "From death we rose. A new generation was born." Maveth wonders if someone could have found her and taken her in, and thinks of the one and only Crone Witch. Let's hope that's the case. Let's hope the Crone Witch just swoops in. It would allude to your theory of the Crone Witch being a protector and of the vein and trying to keep the Wrath of War out of the way. Well, a sudden movement startles her and a spider appears, placing a mirror on the ground. Following its lead, Maveth finds a key and a lock with a chain. She unlocks it, revealing darkness and a ladder descending deep into the shadows. She sees in the shadows a massive spider web, just as she hears Rakaya calling for her, and some sort of force ends up pulling Maveth into this hole and slams the door shut behind her. So at this point, she's trapped in the dark with hundreds of spiders, basically my worst nightmare. And this is where Maveth finally meets Branimir. After being a bit of a creepy weirdo in the corner, he speaks from the shadows and reassures her that if she sings, he won't let them hurt her. She's obviously hesitant at this point, but she complies and starts to sing, opening her eyes quickly to find a creature crouched. And from the book, his skin like bark and covered in black veins. His eyes, two black and soulless orbs that stared back at me. Crooked horns protruded from his head. His lips peeled back over sharpened teeth. Overwhelmed with fear, Maveth screams, and Branimir insists that she keep singing. And to her dismay, the creature keeps moving closer. Something scratched my thighs, and I opened my eyes to find the humanoid creature resting his head in my lap, his thin, pale body curled into himself. He merely lay across my leg, and I felt a bead of moisture slip over my shin. Tears, his tears, weeping as I sang to him. That part actually really got me in the feels.
Too. Poor Branimir.
I almost forgot that he was a spider for a second and just wanted to give him a hug.
I don't think he's a spider, he's a barkman.
This spider barkman creature. Stroking his shoulder, Maveth's fear fades, replaced by fury at whoever caused this being such pain. I was furious at whoever had hurt him. A woman scorned.
Yes, girl. Save all the creepy creatures.
Oh my gosh. So again, I just cannot believe this is only half of part one. We're just continuing to deepen the prophecies tied to both Maveth and Zevander. This puzzle book, huge, so much lore. I feel like we've got the scorpion there being part of the book. We've got the Aries to Flame reference. And so just spitballing, could Aries be the opposite of Sablefire somehow? Right? Like Sablefire being this untamed, chaotic counterpart, where Aries is this more controlled means of like pushing and pulling.
Even the use of like oxygen and fire could be like an interesting element. Like oxygen can like infuse a flame, but it can also completely evaporate it. Like you can't have fire without oxygen. And if you have the ability to wield air and wind, then does that somehow give you an ability to conquer the flame or to emphasize it?
So, especially with the push and pull that we kind of see between Zevander and Maveth. I can totally see that being a thing.
I think there's also like an interesting connection here between like the essence of Sablefire and what it can do to someone and this bone whip. Like we haven't seen Maveth use that glyph to its full potential. Both of these powers have the ability to basically disintegrate a person. One of them is through flame that comes through like their core, but the bone whip is like a power that you can shatter bones and maybe just kind of like evaporate them. So they're very similar. They're powerful abilities. Like I wouldn't mess with them, especially if Maeve can like conquer that power. Like could she bring down like a field of warriors?
Right. I also felt the same way about Aries because at first I'm like, oh, she just got a minor glyph for her major glyph, like loser. I was expecting something so much more grandiose, but at the same time, like that being her major glyph, there's obviously something that we don't know or understand about it yet and its significance. So I agree. I think she's going to be a bad bitch. We just don't know how that's going to come to life yet. And then Branimir's part was absolutely wild. This like calming presence of Maveth's song for the spiders and also him. It makes me feel like this could be like a goddess of death lullaby. Like, is there something that Maveth is able to channel through her singing that has to do with this like piece of death?
So, Kara, do you remember like episode 1 when I said we need to talk about this song that she sang to her sister? And it was like, oh my darling, something or other. And it was like alluding to kind of like death, but like things are going to be okay. And I was like, I think this is important and I don't know why. And I think it's kind of optimistic. And you were like, I don't think it's optimistic at all. It sounds so sad. I'm like, this is the moment, Kara. I was onto something.
You were onto something. Oh my gosh. I mean, if Branimir thinks it's hopeful.
If it's like the song that can like quell the curse inside of these monsters. It feels like another, like the language thing. So something that kind of made me think is like in the beginning, when Zevander has that run-in with the boy outside of the tavern, Like Branimir sounds a lot like that cast off kind of boy. Gavroche, was that his name? And so it made me think like maybe that's why Zevander chose to help that boy. Like maybe he saw his brother in him, or maybe parts of himself that he's like lost and alone in the world. He's vulnerable to the abuse that he's kind of been left to survive by, and the risk of being taken advantage of. And it felt like this kind of like quick human moment that we saw from Zevander, but it was really explained. But now that we've seen Branimir and we get a better glimpse of like who he is, it made more sense to me of like how this boy fit in.
Totally. Yeah, I could see that too, because it was really our first piece of humanity that we got from Zevander. And so you kind of had to wonder at the beginning, like, this man that's got such like a hard exterior, why is he showing so much sympathy for this little spindly looking boy?
So we cut to Zevander alone in his room. I presume that he's probably sexually frustrated. And he's reflecting on his growing obsession with Maveth, and seems to be, to a very small degree, kind of coming to terms, admitting to it a little bit. He says the unwavering determination in her eyes that hardened his body in the most infuriating ways. So he's got this polarizing feeling about how he's noticing he's feeling about her, and he's caught up in it. And then his thoughts are interrupted when Rakaya bursts in with alarming news that Branimir has Maveth in the dungeon. And the very thought of Branimir harming Maveth sends a surge of rage through Zevander. And they run to the dungeon, and using his black flame powers, Zevander forces the door to the dungeon open. And he hears a song emanating from below. The sound that rose up from below pierced him in the heart. A song he remembered from some distant memory he couldn't place. The most beautiful sound he'd ever heard. And he finds Maveth with Branimir. And Zevander is overcome by some really strange feelings. He thinks to himself, the sight of them together stirred a deep sorrow and something else. Jealousy? He couldn't place the emotions. And despite this internal turmoil, Zevander tries to convince Maveth to leave with him, but she refuses. She's asking, why is Branimir locked up here? And Branimir steps in, and he confirms that it's by his own choice, and so Maveth agrees to leave. And it was then that it occurred to Zevander that something else pulsed through his veins, though he couldn't pinpoint it exactly what had him feeling so unsettled. It was beyond jealousy, something deeper, darker, possessive.
We love a possessive shadow daddy.
It's happening. Maveth learns that Branimir is their brother, and that fact complicates her understanding of the family. She accuses them of being cruel to him for keeping him locked away, but they try to explain that she doesn't know what he's capable of. And Zevander shares that they suffer from the same curse, and that raises the terrifying possibility that Zevander could turn into a monster just like Branimir. So Maveth apologizes. She knows she came across accusatory, and we get more of Zevander's kind of withering disdain. He's trying to not like her, but he kind of can't help it. And it's evolving into a flat-out obsession with her. He thinks to himself, she nibbled on her bottom lip, insufferably beautiful with her annoying little habits that seized his attention and left him wondering what she tasted like.
Zevander.
Those dirty thoughts. So Maveth has the chance to learn more about Branimir, including the brutal act of slaughtering the Salassian marauders who came for his mother and his sister. But this was an act that was done out of love and protection, and it seemed to be toward some deserving barbarians. So it leaves us with the question of whether Branimir has ever actually done worse than that, or if this curse has cast him as more of a monster than his actions actually have. Now, after this whole scene, Zevander insists that Maveth sleep upstairs, away from Branimir and his manipulative spiders. So Maveth agrees, but only on the condition that she can bring Branimir food and sing to him. And Zevander agrees. Zevander leads Maveth to the room that once belonged to his mother, and as he watches her stand by the window, Zevander feels an intense, unspoken attraction. Something about her dark figure set against the misty, aphotic view and the candles flickering around her, as if the light longed to touch her, made his chest clench. She was beautiful. No, beautiful was too weak a word. She was intoxicating, exquisitely divine. Zevander's giving us all of the good thoughts.
Right? Who knew this
Now,
dark and broody man could be so poetic?
and just keeping them to himself, you know, like maybe he'll just share some of these with this beautiful woman at some point. Zevander prepares to leave the room, let her go to bed, and Maveth calls out to him with a simple, Zevander, good night. And he responds, good night, Lumanishka. And she asks, do I still annoy you? And he responds, endlessly. Vander has become like a full-on flirt, and I love it. I don't even care if he's like hiding these thoughts to himself. The fact that he's given her a pet name is nothing that I would have ever imagined when meeting this character on whatever page we met him, and I love it. We end this part on the word endlessly, and I am dying. Like, what is Maveth doing over there? Like, how is she going to sleep tonight in this man's mother's bed who tells her that she annoys him endlessly when clearly it is like completely swathed in affection?
He's just like continuously trying to like deny himself things. Like Zevander's character is all about like suppressing and denying everything that we've seen. Like his past, his sexual attraction, any of his own desires.
I think so much so that when he experiences something that gives him like joy and there is like appeal and enticement around it, it's irritating to him. Like it bothers him that he wants her when she's an inconvenience because it's so much easier to go through life not wanting things that you think you can't have anyway.
And Maveth hasn't really let on that she's into him whatsoever. I will say the slow burn has been a little too slow burny. I would have liked to see more moments between the two of them in part 2, like really heating it up to some sort of precipice that also comes in part 2. I don't know if you felt that way, but I would have liked there to be a little bit more yearning.
I agree. I felt like there was a hard edge between them in almost every single interaction. And then there would be like this moment of like a smirk from him. You kind of get the thoughts that they have about each other that are not vocalized. And then they have this kind of like brash dynamic that's going on, which is a little irritating because like, you know that they're attracted to each other and they're thinking about each other. And she's just like not giving you those moments of connection.
Even in the beginning when Zevander was gone, like with the king, and it just felt like he was very much ignoring Maveth, that really bothered me. It's like, just give us a little bit more to work with, because then it's like, if you give us a little bit more yearning and sprinkles here and there, then we can like start to sit through some of these scenes where there might be a bigger barrier between them, or maybe they're having a change of heart, you know? It just like keeps me on my toes a little bit more about how that relationship is going to progress. What Keri Lake has given us here has been incredible. I just wish there was more of it.
I agree. In the back of my mind, I'm like, but what if it's 3 books, Kara? And what if it's like, we still need to have yearning to get us through the next book, you know? So I'm being patient that it's purposefully allowing us to have character development and a relationship that's actually like built, when like we do see a lot of relationships rushed in romantasy books all the time. And we see a lot of slow burn to like can't get enough of each other, which it gets old. And so I think my hope is that this really slow and intentional progression of this relationship is going to allow us to really like feel bonded to them when inevitably we know that things are going to happen. Aside from that, Branimir, I think we have to talk about. I did find that whole scene in the dungeon creepy and scary, and then simultaneously like very beautiful. It gave me the feeling that I attached to some of the scenes in Edward Scissorhands, that there is like this kind of like beautiful, dark, like loving kind of energy. And there's like this beautiful kind of like horror feel to the scene. And I was like feeling that in the scene in the dungeon where, you know, if you were in the scene, you would be like crawling out of your skin. This monster is right up against you, but out of the bottom of your heart, you know, this thing just wants to be like cared for. And to have this very like honest exchange of her singing a song, which is something we know she does to comfort herself, and having that response from this creature that's just left alone is just like such a beautiful moment of humanity. It really did touch me in a way I would have.
And it's so sad to think about poor Branimir, just like all the life that he's missing, just like crouched down as this like disturbing creature, probably scared of himself in the basement. And like Maveth was his only reprieve Like, that's so cute.
Yes. I'm really hoping like Branimir comes in for the win, you know? Somehow he gets out of this dungeon when they really need help and like he can be the hero that he's never really been able to be and not be the monster. Like, wouldn't that be nice? Like, I'll sit over here and hope for that.
I would love to see him have some sort of redemption arc and like come back to life and help them fight in this big fight or a possible plague. Who knows what could happen?
I kind of feel like Branimir has been like cast as a monster with very little proof that he's actually a monster also.
Yeah.
The way they describe it is that like he kills the Salassians who are tormenting Lady Rydane and Rakaya, but we haven't heard anything that suggests that he's done that to an innocent person.
Yeah.
But we also don't know what happened to Lady Rydane, and I am like worried that maybe he like accidentally killed her and like in a horrific way.
Zevander does keep him chained in the basement and does think that he's extremely dangerous. The whole song thing and how Branimir found it comforting and familiar, and Zevander also found it familiar. And they were both struck by this curse. Whatever this curse is, could that be an essence that's in both of them from Cadavros, is helping them remember this song? Like, is Cadavros or whatever curse has struck both Zevander and Branimir, is that a recollection from the old gods that they somehow have access to through their curse?
I love that idea. If the song was connected to these like old stories and prophecies, like that would give me so much joy.
I think we're going to have to bring the episode 1 out of the archives to remember the lyrics from the first
Yes.
song.
Oh my God. That would make me so happy. I was really getting some connections in this part of the book to the Phantom of the Opera. We have this kind of like innocent creature, Maveth, Christine, potentially. If you know the story of the Phantom of the Opera, there is this girl and she goes into the opera and she sings, and the power of her voice compels this monster that lives underneath the opera to like create this bond. He wants to own her, really, but he has this bond. The Phantom has a mask, just like one of the other characters in this story. The character in our story that has a mask also lives in a place that translates into phantoms and shadows. And it's just feeling like there are some vibes here where Maveth has this power with her voice, and we have this kind of like dark figure who admittedly is already feeling possessive about her and doesn't like it when she goes down into the dungeon and sings songs to his brother. So it just feels like we've got some parallel.
And I'd love to just know what we're right on, or like, can she give us some hints? It would be awesome to interview her and be like, here's our top 5 theories.
Can you please tell us our craziest theories and the ones that we're like not so crazy about? And like these references, I kind of feel like they're really just like a compliment. Like I would imagine that they are not intentional, but the fact that we're getting these vibes that are tied to these stories that are like
Right.
well loved and very familiar, I think that's just like the power of her writing abilities.
Totally.
But oh my God, I would love it. Please tell us if we're crazy or not.
Right? Comment below. I still am just like shook that we got so much out of this. And what's strange is that in part 3, there's really only like 2.5 hours left. So part 2 is like a massive chunk of the book.
Yes. So we do have like still quite a bit to cover from part 2 in our next episode. As always, we will try to be efficient, but we will not sacrifice those important details. And then we're feeling pretty good about having part 3 covered in one episode. We haven't read it yet. We can't promise anything. We do know that it's only a couple hours worth of reading left.
Let's hope it doesn't absolutely kill us and we have to break that into 10 episodes. Next episode, we'll dive into the rest of part 2. And of course, we know things are about to heat up between Zevander and Maveth. I simply can't wait to rehash the craziness that is the rest of part 2. If you thought that was crazy, it gets crazier. So for next time, we'll read to chapter 55, page 610. So please make sure you join us back here for another episode when you're caught up. And of course, read along with us. Or if you have another book that you want us to cover, or even just have your own insights on Anathema parts 1 or part 2, please feel free to drop us a line. See you next time.